I don't think our taste in film begins when we decide it does. I don't think it begins when we reach adulthood and start building up a collection of things that we absolutely love. It doesn't start when we discover a new studio, director, actor, theme, or when we're able to use big words to understand the movies that we're watching. I think it starts much earlier. And for me, it started when I first watched Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And the more I revisit this film as an adult, the more I realise that the films I'm drawn to now were already forming for me back then. I just didn't have the language for it. So this film is, for Disney, quite off-piste towards what they were normally going for. You had obviously Disney princesses back then. You had stories like The Lion King and Aladdin, all fun and entertaining and always with a great ending. There was always something quite lovely and nostalgic about those films. And this film didn't really hit in the same way as the typical Disney princess or Disney movies did. This film was way darker. And as a child, I think I always knew that it wasn't quite normal to really enjoy this film over the classical Disney films that most kids were into. All my friends were really very into like Ariel and the Little Mermaid, Cinderella. The Lion King was a huge favourite for most of my friends back then. And it felt like being an outcast to really enjoy something that had so much more of a darker tone to it, like The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think one of the first points about this film that makes it truly unique is the villain himself, Frollo. Frollo isn't your typical cartoonish villain. He wasn't chaotic, he's not theatrical, he is super controlled and is also ashamed. So this film leans heavily into quite thick religious motives, and this feeling of shame is emulated throughout the film through multiple different characters. You've got Frollo feeling shame because of his desires, which I think is an incredibly adult theme that I'm surprised even now is in a film as child dominated as Disney. You've also got the shame of Esmeralda, who is a gypsy and feels like she's not as worth it as kind of everybody else. You've got the shame of Quasimodo, who looks different to everybody else and has been isolated and held back from the world all of his life. And he's felt like a monster throughout the whole of his life. And then you've also got Phoebus, who is trying to do what he is hired to do, but also his morals are, he's struggling with what's going on, and there's shame in the fact that he is one of Frollo's captain of the guards when he's seeing horrible, hideous things being done to people. So Frollo doesn't see himself as evil, he sees himself as justified, and that is quite scary because obviously people in cults and fanatical groups always think that there's a justification for their actions and why they do things. I've recently watched 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, and Jimmy, played by Jack O'Donnell, which was an incredible character, is this cult leader thinking that his way is the right way. And I feel very much that that's echoes in a lot of the films I watch now, is the evilness in people because they feel so justified by the actions that they do. And as a kid, I don't think I quite understood that at the time as much as I do now. I did recently watch The Hunchback of Notre Dame with my children, and there's just things in there that you think like, how was this allowed in a children's movie? But at the same time, what an incredibly dense and thematically interesting film that was for children, which I think sometimes they do deserve that. Architecture plays a massive character in this film without really realizing it. You've got the bell tower, Notre Dame itself, set in Paris, and the building itself holds so much gothic, intense, religious stature in this movie, and it makes itself a character in this. Quasimodo obviously lives in Notre Dame, but Notre Dame itself is a character in this film, and I don't think as a child I realised that until I watched this again as an adult. There's this constant feeling of being observed and watched by a higher power. Obviously, as I said earlier, there is huge, heavy religious themes in this movie, and you are really felt like the building itself is a building of God and God is watching you. It's incredibly heavy as an atmosphere, and it makes it so much more interesting and dynamic as a film. So obviously the main character, Quasimodo himself, is an incredibly dynamic and interesting character. You've got somebody that has felt ashamed and monstrous his whole entire life, and his upbringing has been incredibly sheltered. Frollo's obviously brought him up feeling and thinking these ways, and you are seeing the slow progression of him finally realizing the truth and pushing against the status quo and pushing against people's kind of thoughts and feelings about him and the way he looks. So I think it's a really interesting ugly duckling kind of story. Obviously we're taught that is ugliness, that disfigurement is ugliness, and again, what a heavy and interesting theme, because by the end of it, obviously people reach out to him and touch him, and that's another thing you realise in the film, is that people actually don't even want to touch him through fear of catching or becoming like him. And as you're watching Quasimodo watch everything from a distance and slowly get more and more involved into this world, it's so interesting how he comes full circle by the end of it. My favourite scene from this whole film is when he goes to save Esmeralda. You just see everything coming full circle when he finally realises that, you know what, I'm not going to live like I've been made to feel all this time. And then he saves her, and it's just such a rewarding moment. Not only is it helped by the theme, but the score, the music, the absolute heavy, like, just everything coming into a close is just fantastic. It's one of my most favourite scenes ever out of any Disney film, is that scene. So one of the most surprising things about this film that I've realised as an adult is how it just doesn't finish the way every other Disney film usually finished at that time period where all the films were coming out, all those 2D animated films, late 90s, early 2000s. This film ends very openly. It's definitely something I noticed on this last watching when I watched it with my kids, that actually Quasimodo doesn't get the girl. He doesn't win in the way you think maybe he should, or, you know, how maybe he's earned that kind of ending, and actually Disney take it in a very different direction and don't let that happen. So with the central character not having that traditional win, it's definitely a very different feeling to most, obviously, other Disney films. There's an acceptance there, but there's not fulfillment. And I think that's one of the biggest influences on my film taste today. I really love an open-ended film, one without a resolution or a typical happy ending, one that's left you thinking or wanting to see more or wanting to know what happens, because, you know, you don't get that satisfying fulfillment. I really like how uncomfortable that makes me feel, and I didn't realise as a child that this film does exactly that. So I can't talk about The Hunchback of Notre Dame without talking about the operatic emotion that comes from the music. These songs are so haunting and incredible. I know every word from every song. I think Out There, the one he sings when he's kind of wishing he was part of society, is my favourite. It just feels so full of hope and emotion. But the scale of the score and the music is just so theatrical and gothic and haunting. It's brilliant. Whoever did the music is just a genius, and it really, really adds to the tone. There's no silly songs in this film. There's no fun music in this film. It's all very, very dark and very, very emotive. I think when Frollo sings Hellfire, that you really get an insight into his motives, and actually as an adult now, that's kind of creepy that he wants her but feels like that desire is a sin, essentially. So this film definitely didn't whisper its feelings, it declared them, it screamed them at the audience. And I think that's why I now love emotionally drawn movies. A score for me can make or break a film. I definitely really do lean heavily on how the music makes films feel. And lastly, I couldn't say anything about this film without mentioning one of my most favourite Disney characters in the entire library of Disney films, and that is Esmeralda. Not only is she physically stunning, she is one of the most beautiful women drawn and written on screen, but she's also Romany Gypsy, which, you know, she is a woman of colour, and she's also fucking kick ass. Like, she is so cool. She defends herself, she defends weaker people, she defends things when she knows something is wrong. And for Disney back then, I think they were, obviously a lot of people now look back at a lot of Disney films and bash how badly they've aged. I'm not in that camp. I love a lot of Disney movies and I think there's a place for every single one. But there is something very different about the way they wrote the female character in this film and how much she plays a part in the whole story because of her way of handling things that nobody else will do. A lot of the time she's the one sticking up for everybody or saving somebody, which is, at that point, I think this came out in like 1996, 1995. Like, that was a very, very new and not known concept. Like, that didn't happen in a lot of Disney films. A lot of Disney films, obviously the princesses were saved, and she was the pioneer, in my opinion, for women and, you know, kicking ass and doing the right thing and not being ashamed of that. So for a long time, I've always thought as an adult I've had a much more complex taste in films than I did when I was a kid, but I don't think that's entirely true with this movie. I think the complexity was always there and I've always been drawn to that darker, more haunting style of film. Guilt, isolation, atmosphere, moral tension and tragedy outline this movie, and they are themes that I still enjoy and love in movies today. And I can't believe as an adult that I finally worked out that I found these through an animated film back when I was a child. So I don't think my taste got darker as an adult. I think it was always there. It's just grown. And looking back at this movie, I don't see nostalgia. I see the stepping stones that got me from there to here. And it will always, always be a film I treasure and enjoy forever. I am never going to stop watching this film, even when I'm old and grey, because this film was the blueprint for everything that's come after it.